Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another virtual Pau Hana, broadcasting obviously from the state of Hawaii, respective to each guest's home, but we'd like to thank you so much for joining us here. This evening um, is going to really represent an opportunity for all of us to come together to talk about something incredibly important, and that's going to be um, art that finds its origins here from the state of Hawaii, both as artists of Native Hawaiian descent, both as artists that are local who call Hawaii home, also artists that have moved to Hawaii now find themselves here doing work here. That discussion and that particular narrative is one that is continuously ongoing. To be fair and to be honest, it is not necessarily the most complete and true. It is sometimes going to be privy to all of the shortcomings that we as a species contain, and art is no different. We want to make sure that we have an open and honest discussion about that. And one of the more great opportunities we have this evening is to talk about an exhibit that was impacted, like all of us, by COVID-19, that was going to be something that we're all able to have as a part of our lives. And I think really the most important thing to remember is that the art that we have, that we get to talk about, truly it gives us the opportunity to live a fuller, richer life. And that sometimes we can get mired in the muck of lockdowns and of health and of work and of the general feeling of malaise that kind of permeates our lives. And that is when art, and that is when people who do that work are most important, because they remind us of what it means to be alive and to be human. My hoʻohuli Ikalimi Luna is a exhibit brought to and collected and displayed in Haisam, but it's brought together by three artists, educators, um, people from Hawaii that call Hawaii home. Uh, their names are Drew Broderick, Kaʻili Chun, and Kapulini Landgraf. They are here joining me this evening, and I'm very lucky to have them in discussion. Unfortunately, this evening, Kapulini was unable to join us, so it'll just be Kaʻili and Drew, but our thoughts are with her. She is with us in spirit, and we wish her a speedy recovery. But ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you are, a round of applause, and I'm trusting you because I can't hear you, for Drew Broderick and Kaʻili Chun. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Drew Broderick, Kaʻili will be joining us as well. We're going to be having a display of the images from the particular gallery as we continue to have this particular discussion. You may see that, you may see some of us talking. We're also going to make sure we provide access to digital images of whatever gallery and whatever pieces that we'll be showing, so that you'll be able to see them. So if you haven't had an opportunity to see the works, to see the exhibit, you have to be a little bit more patient to see them in person, but we'll make sure we get you the opportunity to see them digitally. To start, for you, Drew, and for you, Kaʻili, how are you coping? How are you doing in these times?
Just carrying on there, day by day, as we all are. I think pauses like this help us to reflect on what it is that we care about. For me, I care about art. I care about community, marginalized communities, marginalized artists. With Kapulani and Kaʻili and the exhibition that we're discussing about, that care is really centered on Native Hawaiian artists and Native Hawaiian communities. So that's how I'm doing. I don't know, Kaʻili, how are you?
Good, thank you, Drew. I'm doing the same, just trying to carry on as we move through this fluid time. There's a lot going on in everyone's life. Everyone is impacted by this situation and during this time. So it's about how to continue doing your work, um, and being responsible to others and serving others. That is important to, I think, all three of us. And I think this exhibition helps the conversation and helps to move us forward into other realms of service.
To kind of start with the exhibit, when did the beginnings of putting this particular exhibit start? When did the idea, when did the call to action, when did that sort of begin? When did that process start for all of you?
I think it started for each of us at different times. I was invited to participate by Kapu, and I'm not sure Kaʻili if Kapu also invited you or.
Yeah, well, you know, when the original Festival of the Pacific was being organized, that's when we were called in, both Kapulani and myself, to help try to figure out how we would, you know, organize and create an exhibition space and or space for all the nations that were coming in. And then, of course, we drew upon, you know, our curator, our expert curator, Drew Broderick, to really, you know, add an amazing part into this process. And so we're very, very grateful to Drew for his guidance. And I would say that, you know, at least for myself, I've learned much from Drew as well. So thank you, Drew.
Thanks for that, Kaʻili.
So this is about 2018, 2019 would probably be like spring 2019.
I think 2019.
Okay.
We had a lot of conversations and then wound up in the office library at the Hawaiʻi State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, thumbing through index cards, looking at artist file folders, going through around 7,000 works of art.
Wow.
So yeah, it's definitely been a process of exhibition making, also a process of sort of, for me, of remembering histories that aren't discussed as often as they should be. And that started through friendship with Kapu and Kaʻili, but also through an archive, a state archive, which I think is a good point of origin for a lot of important work that's being done.
And to give a bit more background, the exhibit and the collection of work comes out of the Art in Public Places program here in the state of Hawaii, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The APP collection.
And that collection started, and I may be wrong, 1978, correct? And is still ongoing.
It's ongoing. It's been about like 40 plus years now. Yeah. Currently 7,000 works of art, or more than 7,000 works of art, around 7,200, by more than 2,000 artists. Artists of Hawaii, some with rooted connections to this place, others that passed through for a couple years, but produced work that had some relationship to the context here. So it's a lot of work and a lot of artists. We sort of made it
7,000 pieces of art.
Yeah, over 7,000.
How do you, I mean, I know you guys started in the library and going through the archives and going through the Rolodex and going through, you know, as time passes, the cataloging gets more dependent on the time and the technology. How do you approach that collection? How do you approach 7,200 pieces of art and say, these are the ones that are going to come out of and be put together for the first part of this exhibition?
I'll start off and then I'll let Drew finish. But I think that from all three of our perspectives, we were interested in showing Native art, contemporary art, modern art by Native Hawaiians, first and foremost. And so when we had this opportunity, since the Festival of the Pacific exhibition was not going to occur, we had the opportunity to create this exhibition that concentrated on primarily Native Hawaiian artists. And so, you know, going through these 7,200 pieces in the collection was actually not that hard because there are not that many Native Hawaiian artists in the collection. So, you know, it kind of reduced itself from the get-go. And I would say that we selected the artists in a way, knowing of them, knowing of their body of work, knowing of their contributions to the making of contemporary art as Native Hawaiians. We went to them first. And of course, I think we pretty much got everyone, you know, that is in the collection. So it wasn't very difficult moving from the research cataloging, you know, going through all those images, because number one, there weren't very many pieces of art in the first place. And then second, we wanted to make it inclusive in a way that showed art making over time and over generations, but we also wanted to create relationships between those generations, which I'll let Drew expound on. But for me, in terms of looking through those images and then seeing the exhibition come to life, I really saw the work come to life when I saw it with my own eyes. So it's quite different when you're looking at pictures of work rather than looking at the work itself. And so, Drew, you can expound on that.
Yeah, sure. Just picking up on what you were saying about the lack of representation. Just to throw a number out, you know, from those 7,200 works, we were looking at around 200 pieces, and ended up including 46 works in the exhibition. And as Kaʻili was saying, you know, 7,200 sounds like a big number, but depending on what your intention is, that number gets really small really quickly. In a lot of collections, just given the history of art, really. But then to also kind of comment on the relationships that started to develop with time. A lot of the artists are really good friends of each other and longtime friends. Have been collaborators, have been a part of community groups, have waved banners together at demonstrations, you know, shared knowledge about materials and techniques. So it gets even smaller in that sense, because it's a tight community, or communities, plural. We won't be singular here. Yeah, so that was cool. And as Kaʻili said, when you see the work in person, whether it's in the storage at the museum or out in the gallery, it's definitely a different experience. I guess I'd also add that for me, the work came alive when we reached out to the artists to get their perspective, hear their stories about their process, about the particular piece in question. And in some instances, like with Wright Bowman Sr., Mr. Bowman, who's a mentor to Kaʻili, those stories are shared with someone like me through Kaʻili. So we're talking about an intergenerational transmission of knowledge about a work of art and about an artist. And that was, as someone who is very fresh and trying to develop a larger understanding of this history, those are the moments in this exhibition making process that really had an impact on me.
Is there a sort of, as a curator, a switch, or I guess, does being able to talk to the artist specifically about the work that you want to include change how your relationship to that piece? Because sometimes, in my experience being an art viewer, going to a gallery that is specific to a particular community, a primarily marginalized community, the artist only ever exists as the work in black and white print, born date, death date, and the subjects by which they're trying to present and what they're trying to communicate through that art. There is a wish to be able to want to meet the artist to talk about the work, but time has come and they're no longer with us. Does being able to interact with the artist and bring that work into the exhibition make the piece come alive? Or does it change? You know, was there a piece that you were a bit more hesitant to include, but once you're able to talk to the artist, you're like, yeah, this got to be a part of this has to be included?
Definitely. Hearing anybody's story within the context of art or otherwise influences how we approach the world, hopefully. So, when an artist writes back and says, this is what I was thinking about, or when you call them up on their phone and they say, this is what I was feeling, you make decisions based on what information you're given by the maker of the works that you're caring for. So I think in some instances, once we got feedback from an artist, we would move a work. Maybe a work, an artist had more of a relationship with another artist and they weren't in the same room, but because of what we learned, we might bring those works in closer proximity to one another so that that relationship is reinforced both through the material of the work and the kind of immateriality of the relationship.
Is there...
Can I
Go ahead.
just...
Please,
yeah.
please, of course.
Yeah, I totally concur with Drew here because, you have some mentorship relationships as well. And so I have never experienced any teacher-student relationship or apprentice-mentor relationship that you cannot see the influence of the teacher upon the student. And so, like, even when we're dealing with looking at Karl Pau and Kupa'ahi, there is that sort of iconology and imagery that I find that is somewhat, similar. There's a reference, to the mentor or the teacher. And I think that's really important. And the more that you know about the artwork itself from the maker, it's a richer experience. You have a greater understanding. Your perspective is broader, and you have a more intimate relationship with that work, which is very, very important in learning about what that work is speaking to, or speaking about, or commenting on.
I want to take a moment here to remind everyone as well that we're going to give the opportunity for our audience to provide questions. We're going to give about 15 minutes in this 60-minute long discussion to have that. We're going to have that at the tail end. But I did want to invite you, as we continue our discussion to that time, if you have any questions, you can submit them. So when question time comes, we've got questions to answer. I want to invite everyone to put on your thinking caps, start developing those questions, and you can start submitting them now. To move forward, as we talk about having the parameter by which you're going to approach this large collection, anyone would say that a reduction of number from 70 to 100 pieces to 200 pieces based on one bit of criteria. And I'm assuming that these artists were to be of Native Hawaiian descent. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. The exhibition centers on Kanaka artists, for sure.
Yeah, but not all of the artists in the exhibition are Kanaka.
Gotcha. And to be very open about that, 72 to 200 is huge. That is an extraordinary elimination of pieces, and then to pick 46 from that. My first question is, why that drop? Why that reduction in number that seems so drastic based on a very simple criteria? I mean, obviously, one, it's nice because it gives you a nice parameter and you're able to focus on specific work, but I would hope that out of 7,200 pieces of art in a State of Hawaii archive, that if I were to say I want on this parameter to have Kanaka be part of it, the reduction would be by 10%, not by 80%. How do you cope with that? Like it's sobering to me as someone who has to answer these questions. Like there seems to be a gap there, and I don't know what that gap is. And as curators of this, what do you think that gap was? Why that reduction in pieces?
Well, again, you know, there's not that much to choose from in the first place. Bottom line. So I'll let Drew expand on that.
Oh, putting me on the spot. No, I mean, Eric, I think what you're getting at is we're talking about structural inequalities. Yeah, you know, this is much larger than this particular exhibition. It's systemic. It's not just in the field of art, right, or the discipline of art, or the practice of art. It's across the board. It's historical. It's longstanding and ongoing. But the reasons for this are definitely beyond the scope of this exhibition, but the exhibition has been shaped by them nonetheless. And I think when we were talking about you know, how we wanted to approach that absence in this collection, it was more about celebrating the presence that was there, even if it was only 3% of a collection, than it was about trying to talk about the sort of the reasons for that absence, right? We wanted to celebrate the presence, not dwell on the absence. And hopefully in celebrating that presence, we can address the absence as we move onward, because now we know it's there, right? It's identified, it's marked. And once you identify and you mark enough, hopefully change happens.
So it sounds like it wasn't the approach of lacking something for you. It was approaching it as the abundance of something that was present and celebrating that abundance, and in hope making the lack seem smaller with that abundance present.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe a better word is like persistence, right? Despite the inequalities, the work persists. It's in there, you know, even though there are so many things that have been put in place to exclude it from being a part of this system. This institution, this collection is still there. And hopefully there's more of it as a result of this exhibition in the years to come.
A quick question, if my understanding of art in public places is such, they encapsulated works of different mediums, of different types, and also of different scale. Is there a piece that you all included, or is there a piece that you could not include because you're unable to bring it into the gallery space? In that particular selection, it's like, you know what, if this was just 20 feet smaller and just 8 tons lighter, we could have gotten it in here, would have been great, but we can't put that piece in. Are there pieces that just based on their size or their placement, you couldn't include in the gallery?
We included them. We, as a curatorial team, we decided that a work could be a part of the exhibition, even if it wasn't physically present in the gallery. An example is Sean Brown's Kekia'i, which is in the sculpture garden in the courtyard, you know, behind the cafe at High Sam. And it's discussed in the curatorial essay. It's listed on as one of the included artworks. And we sort of thought that in stretching out the exhibition to spaces beyond the interior galleries of the museum, we were kind of breaking down a boundary that I think exists a lot in exhibitions between inside and outside. And that work by Sean is crucial to the effort. I mean, the title alone, you know, Kekia'i, standing guard.
Yeah. Keely, is there, it sounds like the intention was to have a gallery space that was not just a physical one, that it could extend both outside of four walls, but also expand over time. Was that the ideation of the exhibit from the beginning, Kaʻili? Was that to say this gallery, this exhibit, this collection will not be limited by that? Or is that something that you developed as you started to acquire these pieces, as you came across pieces you wanted to include?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yeah, again, referencing Sean's piece and Marcus's piece in the show Across the Way at the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum, we felt those works were important to include, but we couldn't physically, you know, move them to the interior gallery space. But that allowed us to organically, I think, break down that paradigm that exists right now about, you know, inclusivity or exclusivity in a way. And so and I think it, you know, by utilizing, you know, actually the entire museum, inside, outside, upstairs, downstairs, it really helps to expand the notion of what an exhibition can be. And I think really, I mean, I credit Drew on that as well, to now expanding into the artisan cafe and the gift shop area, you know, with emerging artists, as well as one currently established artist. And I think it's important to you know, investigate and explore, you know, different applications of exhibition making. So
That was something I, you know, wanted to discuss with you guys a bit quickly, is that this exhibit isn't just in this particular gallery. It's going to be moving down to the gift space, but then it's going to be happening over time. Like, this is a year-long exhibition that you guys are planning as far as these pieces as it continues, correct?
Yeah, and across that year, certain works will move across the institution and occupy different spaces at different times, which is definitely not something that happens often within a museum exhibition context. It does happen, but not as often as it could. An example is Herb Kane's Canoes of Polynesia. It's a series of 14 va'a, and those works will travel throughout the museum over the year. They'll start downstairs and they'll move across a wall display case. Then they'll move upstairs into the front room of the Diamond Head Gallery. And then they'll cycle out of the exhibition. So there are certain things like that that are happening across the duration.
What are the unique challenges of that as a curator when designing an exhibition that is going to be outside of those four walls? Is it purely logistical, you know, getting these pieces to be moved? Obviously, one-of-a-kind pieces that are older than me need to be treated with great care, but what are the challenges of that, of even executing that, that me as an art viewer don't get to see, that you as a curator are just worried about constantly moving these pieces? What are the unique challenges there?
Thankfully, those challenges are addressed by the exhibits team. And it really is because of them and because of the director, Karen and John, that we're able to do something like this. Because it's very easy to say no to a curator who says to you, hey, I want to move 14 works of art throughout your entire museum over the course of a year. But they all said yes. And they said yes in a way that didn't really involve much of a struggle or a back and forth, which is really cool. And for me, sort of is representative of the support that an institution like the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum and the Hawaiʻi State Foundation on Culture and the Arts can offer. They are in a position where they can support things like this, and why not?
I mean, that's a simple, why, and the best answer is why not? Is there, I guess now that we've had the opportunity, I should say we, but you as curators, as artists, been able to develop these relationships with these pieces, both either relationship to artist as mentor, mentee, either to mediums that they're trying to construct. What are some of the narratives that you see that strings these pieces together outside of who made them? Is there a common thread that crops up for you as curator in these pieces that exposes itself over time? What are the things that are similar between these pieces that you don't get necessarily see at first blush? Because I'm intrigued by the idea that since you're so knowledgeable of them and putting them together, what do you see as far as what makes them similar or what ties them together that me as a first-time viewer won't necessarily get to see?
Well, I mean, for me, it's hard to, we have the relationships with these artists. We know that most of the context and the content of the pieces. And so it's hard not for us to, disregard all of that information. So it's kind of natural for us to see certain pieces mirror each other and certain artists mirror each other. Hopefully in this exhibition, people's viewers, the audience's interest will be piqued so that they take a little deeper dive into these artists and their generations, because it's multi-generational as well, and it's multimedia, and it breaks down the mold of what Hawaiian art looks like or is. And I think it expands the notion of what it can be. And even if you're looking at a piece that is 50 years old, it's still a contemporary, and it has relevance in the history of the art making practice, of our ancestors. There's that connection to ancestral lineage, and there's connection to present time, and it also serves as a base and a foundation through which the emerging artists and the newer generations, the younger generations, are now starting to produce work. So I think, at least from my perspective and my understanding of these works and these artists, it's they're all connected. We are all interconnected, and it's all connected to this place, this space, this aina, this kai, this vai, this pai aina, everything. It's all interconnected, and I don't think that, at least from my view, we cannot, delineate or separate that connectedness.
Yeah.
Is there?
The image we're looking at right now illustrates that connectivity that Kaʻili is tapping into, but it's not necessarily a network of relationships that any viewer can access. And in that sense, sometimes it's important to make visible relationships while withholding all of the information, right? So the image we're looking at right now, each of those artists has a very has a relationship to one another. Just as an example, Kupa'ahi's work on the left and Kahi Ching's work on the right. Kupa'a helped out with a number of community murals that Kahi was a part of, and that some of the other artists in this room were also a part of as organizers. And those artists helped to nurture younger artists like Kupa'a. So to have them in the same space next to each other is to acknowledge that history. It's to acknowledge that the lineage, the influence, the inheritance. Yeah, but that's, you know, again, that's not necessarily something that everyone's gonna be able to access, but it's there. It's in the room right in front of you.
Sorry, how important is that acknowledgement? And not just from, you know, mentor to mentee, but, you know, how important is that acknowledgement as an artist to see your work next to the people that you looked up to, but also in the space like the State Art Museum, to the artistic experience. And as someone who's not artist, it's very gratifying when someone tells me I did a good job on something. But to have it be in such a public forum, to be acknowledged in that way, it fills me in a way I don't quite know. But I ask this as artists, as curators, how important is that acknowledgement as an artist being exhibited to see your pieces in these contexts? Because I don't think that's something a viewer gets to experience as much as the artist does. And I wanted to see how important it was from your perspective, both as a curator and as an artist.
Eric, I think what you're pointing out is it reveals the bias of Kapu Kaʻili and I. We're all artists. So, you know, of course, we're gonna want to prioritize relationships between artists, to acknowledge those artists, as you're saying, because we're making an exhibition from the position of artists and educators. So, you know, yes, it may be unfair to the average viewer, but hey, acknowledging those relationships, just like acknowledging descendants, acknowledging First Peoples, acknowledging historical inequalities, it's vital. All of that is the stuff that produces change. So yeah, as an artist, to see your work next to your mentor, that's what it's all about.
And I mean that there's, Kaʻili, did you have anything to add before I interject? My apologies.
Hey, but Kaʻili, come on, you gotta talk about, come on.
There's gotta be, like, there's something gratifying, and it's okay to admit that, because there's a gratification there. And
oh, totally, there's an honor, you know, there. I mean, we don't do our work alone. It's never done alone. It's always with you know, family, friends. It's never the sole artist working, you know, to produce this, you know, creation. To me, it shows the lineage and the connection, the genealogical connection that we all have. And, you know, our artwork is directed not solely by ourselves as individuals, but by our families and our friends and our communities, the people around us, and perhaps more importantly, our environment, our land, the place in which we live. So, you know, work done from this particular island, it may be completely different from work done on Hawaii Island from the same artist, you know, just because of the nature of that life experience and that momentary experience in time. And so, you know, again, I just wanted, with this particular piece, Herb Kane and Hana Yoshihata, you know, two different generations of artists, but very invested in voyaging and navigation, and one Kanaka Maoli and the other not. But you know, here is a connection again that I think is very powerful, and I must say that I was never really keen on Herb Kane's work, but when posited with these other works around it, it has a resonance that I can't even begin to describe. And when you see it together with Hana's work, it's so powerful. Both of them, you know, they are speaking to things that we don't consider, but we should consider, and we should value, and we should explore more deeply, and share with each other more deeply. I mean, these are experiences, you know, his research into the Va'a, Hana's experience on Hokulea, you know, they're different, but there is a connection, a deep connection that I think is important for us to learn from, so that we as people, as human beings, as creatures of this earth can, you know, go into, so that we can help each other instead of hurt each other.
I know that this particular exhibition extends down into the gift shop, gift gallery area, and I remember mentioned that it's going to be of emerging artists, artists on the avant-garde, new works, artists making work within the last year who may not have a large body of work, but are artists who are working. Why choose to include that in? Why choose to include these emerging artists in the overall narrative? Because you could do this piece, this collection, and be very frank, pack it in, pat yourself in the back. We did it. We did exactly what we needed to do. And then come back in another 40 years and we'll just pick up where we left off here and let history go by. And then we're able to pick up these pieces and draw these experiences and art again. But you guys made the intention of including artists and their work from today, tomorrow in this exhibition. Was that intentional to sort of navigate the narrative of contemporary Native Hawaiian art into the future? Or was that something that came up after the fact?
It's all about continuity across time. You know, that image that we're looking at now with Herb Kane's Va'a, that's 50 years. That's a 50-year-old painting. Hana's poured acrylics on paper behind it was made this year. So, you know, to bring that amount of time and kind of place it in such close proximity, that's powerful. As far as the emerging artists in the cafe go, that was always an intention of ours. There are a lot of gaps in the APP collection with respect to histories of Kanaka art, and to bring these emerging young artists into the same space as the works in the collection is a curatorial proposition. No, it's an offer. There's work being made now by Hawaiian artists the State Foundation on Culture and the Art might not know that. But now, perhaps they do. It's in the building. It got in through the door. It's right there. But you know, unfortunately, I mean, the Friends of HiSam were very gracious to partner with us and to allow us to do this. But unfortunately, because it's in the building and the Friends are presenting it, it's not eligible for review by an acquisition committee. But you know, nonetheless, it is addressing the absence that we discussed earlier, and it is, you know, maybe hopeful. But it's good to be reminded that the work is being made. It's there.
And from a curatorial perspective, I think we have a responsibility for, you know, showing this not only to the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum organization, but you know, to our community, because this is not. It is about a continuum. And it, you know, we never stopped making art. We didn't just start making art at one point in time, but we continue to do so. And we will continue to do so forever. So it's important for us to address the work that's being made now, and for work that will be produced, like you said, tomorrow.
To transition to some questions that we received from the audience, one question I wanted to ask, acquisition of pieces by the state was heavily affected by the unexamined intrinsic biases in the selection process. How will this inherently flawed process change going forward? And I understand where this particular question is coming from, but you know, and you, both of you spoke to your own biases as artists in how you're going to be presenting this work. How do we make that better? How do we make that process better, knowing it's flawed? How do we not commit the same mistakes?
I think we do make the same mistakes, and we've been making, or they've been being made. I'm not going to include myself as someone on an acquisition committee, but maybe one day we will be on acquisition committees. But yeah, mistakes have been made and they're being made. I think that it's important to remember that the APP collection has been amassed by committee. As a result, it reflects the dispositions of those committee members, their understanding of art in Hawaii, or perhaps their understanding of art in the continental US, and et cetera. So how will these inherently flawed processes change going forward? I think they change by cycling through different committee members. If there's a Native Hawaiian committee member, perhaps these conversations will be had when work is being reviewed. So I think, you know, one way to get in there and affect change is to fill out those application forms, you know, get ourselves onto committees.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kaʻili, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, it's always seems to be a slow process. Obviously, how many years has it been? You know, and what's the percentage of Native Hawaiian art in the Art in Public Places collection? Well, you know, that's telling. But yeah, I agree with Drew that we need to cycle in and become a part of the process so that we can be a voice. And you know, it's not, and I think we come from it, especially the three of us, we come from a perspective that we're looking at work that is quality work. We're not looking at any kind of work produced by any Native Hawaiian, but it has to be, you know, it has to say something. It has to be crafted well. It has to be it has to have a context and a content that means something to the maker, at least. And so it's not just about putting anything and everything up.
Mm.
And I think the three of us I feel very strongly about that. So, thinking back to our earlier conversation, how did we select pieces? Not everything got in.
Right.
We looked at all the work from, certain individual artists and selected maybe one that we thought was the best out of the lot. So, it's definitely a process that I think we have been talking about this for a long time, but, the critique process, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, especially, kupuna and that sort of thing. So it's a tenuous type of situation. But, this particular exhibition made it easy to practice our critique and curatorial processes that I think resulted in a fairly powerful exhibition.
A few more questions that have come across. This one I want to come back to. This person wanted to express an appreciation for Drew's optimism and future thinking, but there's a specific question, and this is for both of you. Why do you think Kanaka had been excluded from the contemporary art histories in Hawaii? One of the questions I wanted to ask both of you on top of that is, what do you wish to change about the current narrative in contemporary Native Hawaiian art? Be as honest or as diplomatic as you wish to be there, but why do you think Kanaka have not been included? Of course.
Well, I'll take the first part, and then
Okay.
Drew, maybe you can take the second part. I think, historically, Hawaiian art has been categorized as craft, as Hawaiiana, and it looks a particular way. It deals with a particular type of media, traditional media, and I think that kind of, and with the onslaught of tiki culture kind of thing, that didn't help the situation.
Sorry, I apologize. I don't. Continue. Forgive me, please. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
But continue.
Yeah. Well, so we're dealing, with that explosion of tourism and our history of commodification, of missionization, of all of that, kind of placed Hawaiian art into a pot that people became accustomed to. Either it was traditional or it was traditional like. And any type of contemporary use of material, either, I don't think people knew how to categorize it or how to understand it. So, for example, if and this is not necessarily just in the non-Hawaiian community; it's in the Hawaiian community itself. Yeah. Just using myself as an example, because I learned from Mr. Bowman how to make canoes, or model canoes and o'o and paddles and etc. and woodworking things associated with traditional Hawaiian implements. There are many people out there. Oh, how's your woodwork going? Right. And I don't do wood that much. So it is this kind of this is what you do. Or if you say you're an artist, oh, so you paint, you're a painter. Well, no, actually, I'm not. You know, so those kinds of traditional understandings of what art is or what craft is, I think, is a discussion, you know, to be had. But let me hand over to Drew here.
Listening to Kaʻili talk, I was thinking about a cluster of exhibitions, a group of exhibitions that happened at the turn of the 21st century here in Honolulu. 97, 99, 2000, 2001. 97 was Hoʻokuʻe at the East-West Center. 99 was Hoʻikawai, also at the East-West Center. Then Mai no Kupuna Mai was 2000 at UH Manoa's Art Gallery. The first time in the history of that space, the first time in the history of all of these spaces that contemporary Native Hawaiian art was being exhibited. 2001, you have Namakaho at the Honolulu Museum of Art. So why have Kanaka been excluded from art histories in Hawaii? For the same reason they've been excluded from art spaces in Hawaii. Yeah, and you know, the politics of inclusivity is very precarious. You have one exhibition and you check your box and you don't do another for decades. So hopefully this is not the case with the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum. Hopefully my hoʻohuli kalima I luna is not the one-off that becomes a pass. Hopefully it's something to build on, and we can learn from what didn't happen at the turn of the 21st century, but what could have happened, which is to actually internalize care for Native Hawaiians as institutions. You know, I guess time will tell.
Is there, I think Drew and I share a psychic connection when we talk about contemporary Native Hawaiian art due to shared experiences and mutual friends, but I know what I would like to change in that. And I wanted to ask Drew what he'd like to change about it, like the current narrative. Like if magic wand, even if you could make one thing different, what would it be?
I think for curators, for some curators, care is the foundation of a curatorial practice. It's also part of the root word. But I think with care comes a different kind of desire. And as I've personally cared more about the histories of Native Hawaiian art in Hawaii, my actions have changed. So if I had a magic wand, which I don't, all I would do is wave it and ask that people care a little bit more about the histories of the place that they currently live in, the lands that currently support their existence. And I think, you know, caring a little bit more about history will go a long way in a lot of disciplines, not just art.
We're going to go a little over, and I appreciate you giving me a bit more extra time, but I want to get as much of the discussion in. A few more questions. One, this one you can speak to if able to. You touched upon it, I believe, earlier, but would you be able to speak a little bit more about Rocky Jensen's 1987 presentation to the SFCA committee, talking about Native Hawaiian representation in the collection? They mentioned it there that it seems that 30 years later, it hasn't really changed. Are you familiar with that particular presentation that he did? I know we kind of spoke to it a bit, but I think in relationship to that particular presentation, if you're able to. It's a very specific question.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that reference. Maybe by way of Halenaua III, which was a vital society for contemporary Native Hawaiian art. And Rocky was one of the founders. Halenaua Halenawa was really about perpetuating art and culture through Hawaiian worldviews. It was perhaps one of the first moments when Native Hawaiian artists identified as contemporary Native Hawaiian artists. And this was taking place in the mid-70s. In 76, they had an exhibition at the Honolulu Hale called Artistic Alana. It's all about connectivity of contemporary Native Hawaiian artists. And so the reference to the 87 presentation to the HSFCA committee was one of many, many attempts by Rocky, by associated individuals, by Halenawa III, to advocate for really the well-being of contemporary Native Hawaiian artists and the increased representation of artwork by these same artists. Why hasn't anything really changed? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question. It's a fair question. I think what I'm interested in is what that kind of questioning hopes to achieve, right? Why has anything changed? I don't know, you tell me. But what's important is that we keep doing the work to take the small steps that we want to take in the ways that we can to produce larger change. And the reasons why it hasn't changed will probably continue. But that doesn't mean that the attempts don't matter. Personally, when we came across the letters from Rocky to the HSFCA in his artist folder, it was a moment that provided a lot of clarity for myself, because it helped me to understand the process that I'm a part of right now as something that didn't start from nothing. It's been happening, and it's going to keep happening. So, you know, even if the change hasn't occurred, being able to align my own efforts, align our efforts as a curatorial team with the efforts of those that have come before us, with the efforts of artists like Rocky Jensen, with the efforts of grassroots organizations like Halenawa III, that really gives a lot of much needed support, I think, to continuing this process. So, you know, didn't answer the question, but that question might be a great question for the director of the Art in Public Places program, the director of the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum. Karen and John have both supported this process, and they might have a lot to say about that.
And to be sure, we ask these questions with respect and understand that there are no easy answers to them. That, you know, but again, we ask them to move the process along and I think, even in my opinion, even more importantly, we create a bigger bandwidth for artists and for curatorial staff and for committees to see more of that work. And what it comes down to is going to be, and you guys mentioned it, the work itself standing on its own 2 feet of quality and being able to say something impactful. So we ask these things out of respect, but because we're all art lovers and we all want to see this develop. One last question, and I'll let you guys get on with your day. This one is an interesting one. Will this curatorial collection be proposing an exhibition for contemporary art at the 2024 Pacific Festival of Art? And if so, is this current exhibition indicative of what you guys are interested in to present to other Kanaka from the Pacific? That could be a no as well. Feel free to.
I mean, in an ideal world,
Yeah.
We could build on this exhibition and perhaps present work from all of the participating nations across the entire institution. You know, who knows if that's going to happen, but yeah, hopefully this exhibition can generate conversations that impact future events, both inside and outside of the state institution. Kaʻili, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. You know, everything is possible at this point in time. You know, we would like to see, you know, another iteration and or, you know, imagining of an exhibition that would address the Festival of the Pacific in 2024, which doesn't necessarily mean exclusively Hawaiian art, or, you know, so yeah, everything is on the table at this point, and you know, we are currently thinking and discussing amongst ourselves, you know, what direction that will be, but we don't have anything conclusive at this moment.
I'd be remiss not to also acknowledge Kapulani Landgraf, who is unable to join us for this particular discussion, but is with us in spirit. She's convalescing after an injury, but we want to acknowledge her as we come to a close for today's discussion about my hoʻohuli, lima, luna. In closing, I know the upcoming reality is that we will soon be having another state lockdown, and that has impacted the opening of the second portion of the exhibit, correct, Drew?
Yeah.
Okay. So have any, I mean, I know it's gonna be very fresh and new. Will we announce an opening when it is safe and everyone is able to in the near future, do you think?
Yeah, we were able to get the exhibition up, so it's installed, which is nice. It's there, and perhaps the reopening of the museum can coincide with honoring the work that's included. Yeah, it's there.
As we come to a conclusion, is there anyone that you two would like to thank before we conclude this evening?
Yes, of course. We would like to thank John Johnson and Karen Ewald and the entire exhibition team led by Teague, Brennan, and you know, we're so grateful for their support and you know, in every single way that they could support us, they did, and so we're very grateful. We're also grateful to Ali Ishikuni Sasaki and the Friends of the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum, who have you know, partnered with us to create this exhibition of emerging artists and established artists. And I'll let Drew continue the.
Yeah, and also, you know, it's really important to the three of us to acknowledge the participating artists. Yeah, we gotta center the artists' voices and amplify the artists' voices. There are a lot of them in this exhibition, but definitely hearing them as we're discussing now. So yeah, mahalo to all of the artists who produced the work, who are carrying on, and who hopefully will continue to produce work amidst a global pandemic and an economic collapse and social unrest, because I think the work will be real good. Anything that's made now it's going to be important work to see. And I also just personally want to thank Kaʻili and Kapu. It's been really meaningful to work alongside both of you and to learn from both of you.
I know Kapu would say the same thing, but Drew, I'm so grateful to you. So appreciative of learning from you. And that just expresses, I think, you know, what is occurring in the exhibition itself is that, you know, generations are learning from each other and have a relationship, a meaningful relationship. And I just really, I thank you, Drew, and I thank Kapulani as well for this very, very meaningful experience for me.
Intergenerational exhibition making. That's what it's all about.
Thank you so much. My mahalo to the both of you, Drew Broderick, Kaʻili Chun, and Kapulani Landgraf. My hoʻohuli ika lima I luna is the name of the exhibit. Unfortunately, with the lockdown that actually starts in just 24 hours, a little bit more than that, the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum will be closed in accordance with that. There will be, let you know when reopening, when it is safe, when we're able to get access to these exhibits again. We understand it is a very unique time, but not one that we have not seen in our history, but one that continues to challenge us with new things. We will get more information out to you regarding reopening at all the social media. Again, you can follow the Hawaiʻi State Art Museum on Instagram. They will update you there. Also, we'll make sure that we give access and opportunity to get to the digital images you saw of the gallery as it currently is, so that you're able to kind of not take away from seeing them in person, but obviously giving you the ability to see them safely from the comfort of your home. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. From wherever you are, a round of applause for Drew Broderick, Kaʻili Chun, Kapulani Landgraf. Mahalo very much. Thank you so much for joining us here on Pau Hana. Have a great evening and be safe.
Thank you so
Mahalo.
much.
Have a great
Mahalo.
one.